posting in those couple places.
Cool.
Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today I'm here with my co host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I've never had a bad day in my life.
I thought they made creams for that. Now, as we're going through it today, we have a very special, uh, not a guest, never an actual guest. But we do have a pretty good subject for today. We're going to be talking about religious things, uh, heresies, and just general ideas that we personally hate. Personally.
So, to be clear, this is a friendly ecumenical discussion, shall we say. So, the rule of thumb is these are so obviously wrong that if you are like in the mere Christian camp of C.S. Lewis, you really should know better.
Yeah.
So, we're not going to get like I don't know. Father Joe Bob Joe claims that the Pope is only infallible on Tuesdays. And then I go into a long rant on why this is dumb and Ben zones out.
I'm already zoned
Uh
out.
exactly. That's not the sort of thing we're talking about. We're talking or you know, I don't know. My Reformed Baptist church down the street believes something completely ludicrous about the type of wood used in the pews. Literally, I just made this up. I have no idea. I don't follow Protestants. Uh,
I mean, that's a real thing though, but uh, and I hate it.
it sounded semi-realistic, but the point is, like, inter-Catholic and inter-Protestant fighting is not what we're talking about. Nor are we talking about like I would not say as a heresy. Ben doesn't believe in the primacy of the Pope, and then just go like, and then we just start an argument. Like, no, that's not the point of this stream.
If I wanted to do that, I'd go on any average Catholic forum.
He would too, and honestly, it would be kind of funny.
It's so annoying too. It's just such a small thing, and it causes so many problems. I'd rather be fighting about like half the Mary stuff that goes on, and it's like no, no. For some reason, there's some grandma who thinks I personally hate her because I'm not enthusiastic about what the Pope gets up to on a Tuesday morning from the seat of St. Peter.
Now, this is not the point of the
He's not even
stream.
sitting on the chair half the time he says stuff, Anthony. He's not even sitting on the chair. It's not fair.
Did you know that there isn't even an official chair? It's just a saying.
What? This
No,
makes
I'm
it
kidding.
even worse. Anyway, I'll start us off. Uh, so this one's pretty prevalent, but I absolutely dislike the "What would Jesus do" movement in all its forms. However, it's put forward today, and that includes like the weird love songs for Jesus and like this whole like cultural Christianity that focuses on Jesus without actually doing anything of his message. So it's usually as I look for something to drink, it's usually based around like something he said, you know. Uh, I think the "What would Jesus do" stuff. It's got its own history, which is actually pretty interesting, and it's worth doing a deep dive down Wikipedia, and then you can see how many times you click until you reach one of the weird Indian gurus that ran around America in the 1970s. But
Did you
basically,
know if you click the first link on every Wikipedia page, eventually you'll always reach philosophy? True story.
thank you, Anthony. Uh, but it, but basically, it focuses on the usual stuff. Don't judge. God is love. That sort of thing. And one of the things that made it very insidious is that it hyped up religion in the minds of my generation, but then did nothing with it. Like, okay, so now you've done the thing, you've got the bracelet, and now you live like Jesus. And your mom or dad or whatever is, pretty up and up on it. And then, like, you see your mom, like, run down a biker. Now, don't get me wrong, bikers are a plague on this fair planet. And they deserve every time that they run over. Usually. Usually. Not all.
Now, are you referring to cyclist bikers, like not
Yes.
motorbikes?
Not
Okay, got
motorbikes.
it.
Motorbikes are cool. But and then she like starts swearing up a blue storm, and it doesn't matter what she said earlier because she's a baby boomer. It's all about her again, and then you're stuck in that selfish cycle that you hoped that the "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet would kind of break you of. And a lot of the times there were promises of like happiness, not wealth because you were a kid, but like that God would take care of you in the way you expect and not the way that God will actually do it, which is always going to suck. Like it's well, it shouldn't say that. It doesn't always suck, but like it's going to suck more often than like your average preacher's going to admit. It's a very grim but good preacher indeed who will admit that you will hate a lot of the times that God admonishes you and makes you a better person because it's a lot of pain usually. Uh, and so that those times would come, and it would be like this weird counter to all the good vibes that were given to you through the WWJD movement. So like it's one of those things where I view as like charismatic or charismatic adjacent, and like it led into a whole bunch of different church movements like the Vine movement and whatnot, or I think they're kissing cousins actually, not direct relations. That kind of continued on to do things that interfered fears with the work of the gospel. Um, like you can see in a lot of these church services, their roster of goers hasn't changed in 20 years. Everyone has gray hair. There's no children. It's just one of those things that just keeps on like devolving as time goes on, and a lot of it wasn't started by the WWJD movement, but it certainly wasn't helped by it, and it created a culture of cultural Christianity that didn't survive my generation reaching adulthood. All right, Anthony, go for it. Unless you want
So
to ask
for
questions.
um, yeah, I was going to not ask questions, but I was going to make a comment that I had a theology teacher who told us that he never liked What Would Jesus Do, and he said, my main problem with it is if you actually read the Gospels, it's very clear that everybody is very surprised at the things that Jesus does. So it's very hard to guess what will Jesus do in any situation.
Yep.
And it seems to me like we are not supposed to do what Jesus would do. We're supposed to do what Jesus tells us to do, which is a lot more clear
Yep.
and a lot harder to get wrong. Like it's all there. Uh, so I agree. That's a good one. It's an interesting one too because it's not one that is like so obviously terrible. You know what I mean? Like there are
Yeah.
probably good, intelligent Christians who genuinely like they think that they're doing a good thing with it. But I would agree with you. I don't think overall that it's a good movement. Uh, so I'm going to get the fun started with the particularly awful takes, going off a suggestion that you gave, and we're just gonna blanket it as one large thing: the errors of Father James Martin. Uh, so what does that mean exactly? For those who don't know, Father James Martin is a Jesuit. I know it's already we're off on the wrong foot, but anyway, Father James Martin is a Jesuit priest who has made himself very, very big in the gay rights movement. Uh, he is a particularly insidious form of worm tongue, is how I would put it, because he always says and does just enough not to technically be heretical or If he is heretical, I'm going to scratch that. Not to give himself plausible deniability for heresy. Now, I am of the opinion that eventually it is not plausible. I am also of the opinion that James Martin should have been excommunicated a long time ago. But I will give the man some credit. If you read his stuff and listen to him speak, he is a slippery, slippery speaker. Uh, it is very hard to pin him on anything. So you can I'm gonna call this the Martin Shuffle. You can get the pattern by reading him enough and listening to him enough. You can see how he does this. So he will make a comment that is technically not outright heretical, but is clearly implying it. I am going to give an example here about gay marriage. He will say, I really think that the Catholic Church should look into uh, having mercy on same sex relationships that try to form marriages, or something like that. Or he should go, I really think that the Catholic Church should consider, uh, just consider, like, he'll be very careful that he won't say that they should change anything. He'll use the word consider changing how they view same sex relationships, right? And he won't actually say they should acknowledge gay marriage, but what he will say will clearly imply that.
Right.
And then you start to get the shuffle. Somebody will ask him point blank. Generally, he'll get a bunch of people who will go, yes, like Slay Queen type people. Like
Yes.
Slay Queen, bunch of
Only in
people
his
who.
private chambers, but yes.
What was that?
Only in his private chambers.
Yeah, right? No, like he'll get a bunch of people though commenting on the post, which will generally be on Twitter or something, right? Going, I agree, amen, Father. It's beautiful that you're doing this. Thank you for fighting for gay rights. But then a traditionalist-minded Catholic will point blank call him out by saying, the church absolutely cannot acknowledge gay marriage. That is a sin. You can't do that. And then he will go, I never said anything about gay marriage. I never said anything about the church acknowledging gay marriage. I just said the church should consider it. And then they will respond, okay, but what if we consider it and the answer is, no, we can't do that? Then he will ignore you and he'll just keep going because he has given himself plausible deniability. Or alternatively, this is even more common, he will share something that someone else says. For example, someone will say, the United States is so concerned about abortion, but they don't care at all about universal health care. And he'll share the comment with the comment, really makes you think, very wise. To which somebody will go, but Father Martin, babies are dying. That's insane. To which he will respond, well, hold your horses, buddy. I never said they weren't. I just said this was an interesting comment that we should consider. Should go, okay, so I considered it, and my response is, babies are dying. And then he'll go, you don't care about people who are dying of diseases. You're terrible, and move on. And this is how he does everything. There is a documentary about Father Martin that was like basically produced by him. So it's a puff piece documentary. Now, obviously, I did not watch the documentary. I did watch the Catholic apologist Trent Horn review the documentary, and it's more of the same with this. It's like gay families who are like, I didn't think I was welcome in the Catholic Church, but then I met Father Martin, and he told me God loved me. And that is true as far as it goes. But what are the promises that Martin is making to these people? Like, is he trying to tell them that the church can accept the fact that they are in a sinful relationship? Like, if that's what he's implying, then he is absolutely wrong, and it's cruel to tell people that this could ever be the case. But this is what he does. Uh,
Yep.
he often attends like gay award ceremonies to accept awards for campaigning for gay rights, which is weird since he claims he doesn't want to change church teaching. So what is he campaigning for?
Right.
Like, that's not right. Something is wrong here.
Something is fishy.
Exactly. So, I think that James Martin should have been excommunicated a long time ago. At the very, very least, and perhaps in concern for his soul, his bishop should have ordered him to get off social media, uh, and not to make public appearances anymore. And then if he disobeyed, then he should have been excommunicated. So perhaps you could add a step in between. Either way, like, he's doing great harm to Christianity and the church, and it's worth noting that Father Martin represents the Catholic side of an issue that is very much there on the Protestant side as well. It's an overall Christian issue. It is certainly not unique to the Catholic Church. However, Father Martin represents a particularly insidious part of this because, unlike some churches, not all churches, there are churches that are very clear about like their position on, same-sex marriage and things like that, but the Catholic Church in theory is very clear about its position. There is a papal document, Humanae Vitae, that is anti-contraception, and they have been consistent in each version of the catechism and each pope, including Francis, by the way, for whatever that's worth, saying that the church absolutely cannot bless same-sex marriages because the church can't bless sin. So, in theory, we are like, this is decided in the Catholic Church, which makes what Father Martin is doing even more insidious because it makes it look like it's open for debate when it is not.
Right.
Uh, the goal, of course, what he would really want, though I doubt he'd admit this, is he wants to try and wrench open the door to debate. Uh, I don't think that will ever happen, but I do think he wants that to happen. And I think that the church should make it clear that that will never happen by excommunicating him,
Right.
but they won't. Uh,
Right.
which is a shame. Like, it's it's particularly difficult because when you see, there are Protestant churches that are holding the line on this issue, and good for them, like, legitimately.
Yeah.
However, when you see the Catholic Church appear to give ground on this issue, it's a bad look for Christianity as a whole, because as far as the public knows, correctly, by the way, the Catholic Church literally, like, has said and been very clear that they can't give ground on this issue. So you see a guy like Father Martin there, and they go, huh, maybe it's not so set in stone after all. And it kind of flows outward to all of the Christian churches. It is insidious, it's evil, and people like Father Martin, who is, I guess to be fair to him, more representative of a larger problem than the problem himself, drive me up a wall.
Yep. Guys like him certainly don't do Christianity any favors. They certainly hurt the cause of Christ. And of course, I suppose this would be a good segue into talking about the prosperity gospel. Uh, One of the things that people have a hard time dealing with is, of course, theology that makes them feel good. Actually, I should ask a question. So, Father James Martin, uh, he can't be removed from power unless his bishop allows it, uh, makes it happen, right?
Well, uh, his bishop is the immediate authority over him, right? There are higher authorities that could overrule it, like the Pope, for example.
Right.
But I have no idea how much Francis even knows about what's going on, and we've talked about Francis before, but literally, I'm not going to say anything because I just don't know how much he knows. Like, he might have liked a tweet by Martin, but the tweet was an incredibly innocuous, like, "Hi, Holy Father" tweet, and he's a major celebrity, so who knows?
Right.
Uh,
Oh, this is, one of my Catholic types. Some undersecretary who's really been running the Twitter feed, takes it and it's like, oh, well,
yeah,
this is.
I have no idea what Pope Francis knows about Father Martin, if anything.
Yep. But, they're stuck with him, is my takeaway from that. Because I guess his bishop might be in taciturn approval if, uh, you know, if, uh, if he's aware of it, or he might
Yeah,
think
I
it'd be
mean,
harmless.
I don't know who his bishop even is right now.
Right.
Like I'm not sure where, like what his canonical status is or anything like that. I do know that he hasn't been disciplined. Like
Right.
that just hasn't happened. Which is a black mark on the church. He absolutely should have been. And years ago.
Right. It's like a sex offender preaching from the pulpit of a Protestant church. It happens, unfortunately. Uh, and
Yeah,
it's
you might want to say like, "Oh, that's really unfair to Martin," but I don't think it is. Like, I would honestly put it at nearly that level. I mean, for one thing, like, no, I was gonna say something particularly nasty about Martin, but I'm going to not in the interest of charity. But
fair enough.
yeah, I don't think that the preaching is trying to think of how to put it. I don't think it's. I think it is on the level of what you were saying about sex offenders. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it's difficult for me, an outsider, to really judge what's going on with guys like Martin, for the simple reason that quite frankly, I don't tolerate that in my own pastor, and I've walked out of churches who have. But also, like, my pastor has a Twitter feed. He occasionally posts something, and it's usually whatever he posted on his Facebook. It is clear that uh, the choice of the matter is more about, shall we say, just making sure that his stuff's out there and saying stuff rather than some sort of political messaging, which seems to be the case most often by people with a Twitter account, um, especially those of a religious bent. Still, it's a shame. Just like it's a shame that men like Joel Osteen do preach still today. And of course, there's all sorts of copes and ideas that come out. Something about the prosperity gospel is often bandied about, but few really get like how prevalent it is on a lot of things. Uh, in the '90s, especially, it was pretty big. Uh, uh, what is his name? Super Eye Patch Wolf has a pretty good video on like fake psychics and stuff like that. And a lot of it, more than I'd like to admit, even in the video itself where he talks about it, does apply to, um, Protestant Christian, the faith healer types, who basically make a living scamming those who don't think uh, very seriously about their religion, about their faith. Like it's thinking about James Martin, he does the little shuffle, but in reality, it's just weasel words he's pouring out into the internet to create dissension, and it's the same way with a lot of pastors who go on there and say, "Well, I am facing a lot of persecution." I've seen this from a lot of people in general, but they'll go up and, "Oh, I'm facing persecution," and then it turns out it's just some mean tweets or some dude who's coming on to debunk the faith healings, that sort of thing.
So, hold on. I might be slightly confused. What do you mean by debunk that sort of thing?
So basically, nobody's getting healed at a faith healing event. Like, I'm gonna put that up right now. It is likely, it is very likely, that nobody has ever been healed in one of these Big Ten faith healing events, as described. Don't get me wrong. There's probably some backwoods Alabama pastor who's healed a man, pulled him out of his wheelchair in an event with maybe 50 people in it. All right? I'm not talking about those little things or genuine events. I'm talking about people who go out and their goal is to create a crusade or a big event for the sake of having a big event and maybe even profiting off of it. In my opinion, Christianity is best one on one. And I think that that's something that's shown through the Bible and through the Gospels. The spread, I mean. Philip, there were maybe three people in the eunuch's chariot. Philip, the eunuch, and the driver. Uh, the eunuch and Philip, the Ethiopian eunuch, I mean. The Ethiopian eunuch was already educated according to the Jewish law, and he needed Philip to explain things to him. Now, keep in mind, he, if I recall the timeline right, there's a very good chance that he was there when they killed Jesus, the Ethiopian eunuch. Therefore, it's more about the explanation of things. The thing is that people take things going down and they go, well, you need some Jesus in your life. You need to give me money so the Holy Spirit is upon ye, and all this other things. I'm being attacked. I need to buy a second airplane, and more. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing until recently, grievance politics, woke culture, actually replaced a lot of it, which I thought was kind of funny because it's like a holier than thou movement was replaced by a more disabled than thou movement. These people live in luxury and then demand people send gobs of money to them so that they're blessed. And they use all sorts of justifications. Oh, you are planting a seed of faith. And brother, don't you know that faith as little as a mustard seed can move mountains? That's true, that's true. That is in the book, brother. That is in the book. Yes, sir, indeed. And don't you know that it is a small thing to give $1,000 to this? But if you can give what you can, we won't say no. God can use the widow and her two mites to with great faith, and He can certainly use your $2. But give what you can. Give what you can. That sort of thing. And it worked on a people who didn't think deeply about their spirituality. Uh, Going through, and this is a little bit off the take, and I won't go too far on it. But going through the last century, we've been having an era of nihilism, where nobody actually thinks deeply about their choices, and instead kind of just goes with the flow, or doesn't question authority like they should. So they would just give it out. Fortunately, as the older generations and greatest generations disappear, it's dying out a little bit. But some of these things are so big that they just have a life on their own. And it leads to things like sexual immorality among the pastors' leadership. It leads to things like greed and mansions and shiny Corvettes. There's Creflo Dollar, who would have like bodyguards and such as he went into his Atlanta church. There was, at least I think they were bodyguards. He had a fleet that would go with him. They would meet with presidents and kings and so on and so forth, dictators. And it would go from there. Most of the time, they would end up corrupted. A few of the times, like Billy Graham, even though there are some rumors about him, I don't know how credible they are about Epstein Island sort of things. He preached the gospel. I've listened to him preach the gospel. But so did guys like Ravi Zacharias, who was having sex with his masseuse regularly while he preached the gospel. So it's not something you can depend on. And everyone would just follow in. And, thinking about it, I don't really know anyone who's ever saved by a Billy Graham crusade. And those who do still do those type of things see almost no fruit. So you have this whole system of failure, top to bottom, based on people not being into their Bibles, not being into the Word, and instead just going with whatever they fancy. Yep.
So I used to be a fan of, I mean, used to be as if I'm still not, of the show Justified.
Yeah.
And I will say, unironically, and this is connected, I promise, I'll get to it. It's one of the best depictions of Protestant Christianity I've ever seen in the media. Protestant Christianity is very rarely depicted well in media. Catholicism actually can be sometimes. Like, yeah, Daredevil does it, and a few shows have, like they'll have Catholic priests, and that's because Catholicism has a lot of rules and things, right? You could look into exactly how it's run. It's easy to reconstruct.
And you might
So
have it better on the show than from your local priest.
yeah, but you get the idea. Like Catholicism, in some ways, it's more visually dramatic, more media friendly. But Justified was interesting in that it had one of the best portrayals of Protestant Christianity that I've ever seen in media. So it took place in the Deep South, right? I mean,
Yes.
uh, actually, it didn't. It took place in Kentucky, but it was effectively the Deep South the way the show treated it. uh,
I'll
but
remind
you know
people
what I
that
mean.
he's in the Northeast. So.
What's up?
Oh, nothing. That if somebody takes offense, it's like he's an East Coast boy. Don't you worry about it.
The way they treated it like it was the Deep South. Everybody was a redneck and a hillbilly, but whatever.
Right,
Uh,
right.
Not the point. So you have Boyd, who's the villain in season one, joining like a pseudo Christian neo Nazi cult thing, and then losing his faith when his father like murders all of his followers. Uh, and then in season two, this is where it gets really interesting to me, anyway. In season two, there's a whole plot line that runs through the whole season involving a street preacher named Billy. And Billy is a snake handler. You know the type, right?
Yeah.
So he handles snakes, and when he's like, "Yeah, I've been bit, but I've never gotten sick because the Lord has saved me." Well, he starts muscling in and actually getting the people to like stop buying drugs, and Boyd is getting bothered by him. That whole thing. Uh, so Boyd needs to come up with some sort of way to, get him to lose popularity. So he goes up in front of the congregation. He figures out what's going on. That his sister, who goes up at the meetings with him, has been milking the snakes, right?
Right.
Milking the poison out because, of course, she is because snake handling is nonsense. What? Uh, but Billy genuinely didn't know that. Like she had tricked him. So the whole in the in this big climactic scene, Boyd goes up and says like, "This is a real snake, an actual rat, like." And he goes, "I did." He goes, "If you really think you can do this, go ahead, handle it." And the guy does, and it bites him, and he dies. So you go through the whole season, and now Cassie, who is the sister, wants revenge on Boyd for basically murdering him, even though like technically he didn't, but as far as she's concerned, he did, right? And they go through the whole season, but there's this amazing moment at the end of the show. So there was a character named Ellen May who was a prostitute who was involved in a murder with Boyd, and because she's a witness, they decide that they're going to murder her, and she converts to Christianity. Like it's actually a plot line on the show that she converts to Christianity. So first she goes to a character who's kind of like on the border between hero and villain named Limehouse, and she goes to him for help. And when Boyd sends his girlfriend after Ellen May, Limehouse tells her, "Have you ever stopped to think like why we're doing this? You know, like that this cycle of vengeance and death is not good for people." So and he goes, "I sent Ellen May away. I don't know where she went. Like I couldn't tell you if I wanted to." So they cut to Ellen May later, and Ellen May says, "God worked a miracle in that man's heart and saved me." Like that and they're being completely serious. Like she's being totally serious when she says this. And she goes, "And I know," and she's meeting with the street preacher, Cassie, the sister. And he's like, "And I know that God," and he goes, "And I want to be bathed in the blood of Jesus." So finally, there's a confrontation at Cassie the Street Preacher, and Ava, who is the girlfriend of the villain, goes to shoot her and can't bring herself to do it. So she tells Boyd. So Boyd goes, "All right, I understand," and he gets his like somebody else to go and shoot her. When the U.S. Marshals show up and rescue her, and the episode ends with Raylan, the main character, finds Evan May and says, "You know, the reason we were looking for you is that the guy we caught refused to talk unless we helped you first." And he ends it by saying, "Somebody up there is looking out for you." Like he is referring to the guy who was, the guy who wouldn't talk unless he helped her. But
Yeah.
the implication of the episode is extremely clear. Every time I watch that episode, it boggles my mind that they actually like did that in a mainstream show. I don't think I've ever seen somebody like portray, I guess what Christianity could be, should be in Protestantism in a way that both felt very true to the area, but also didn't make fun of it. And, like, they're objectively correct, too. Right? Like, she
Yep.
survives. She makes it to the end of the show. It's fascinating. I love Justified. I miss it. It's going to be coming back. I'm looking forward to it, even though I know I'm going to be disappointed.
Yep.
Uh, I know I'll be disappointed, but I can't help it. I am looking forward to it. Uh, well. Anyway, it all looped around. I just wanted to tell that story because it always blows my mind that that was there. Like, I still can't believe that that was in, like, a mainstream show. Uh, but, it was a different time if you think about it.
It wasn't that long ago, though.
No, it wasn't, but it was still a different time.
True enough. So is it just like portrayal of Christianity in media or something like that?
uh, I would say what made that whole era different was just the fact that they were willing to portray Christianity in a positive way. Granted, you still see it sometimes with Catholicism, but like I think that Deep South evangelicalism, I'm not sure if you'll ever see that portrayed that way again.
Yeah. A lot of it's completely misunderstood or just kind of mocked. A lot of it is that the East Coast and the West Coast look down on the South. The East Coast at least had the excuse of winning a war, but the
Eh,
West Coast, eh, it's one of those things.
it
Uh,
is.
let's see here. Now this one,
Do
this
I have?
hmm?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm trying to think of a next one. I'm trying to think of something that's not too into the Protestant Catholic divide. So, for example, there was, and I do think this is something that you would agree with me with. There was somebody who was talking to me about sola scriptura, and they insisted to me that they knew which books were part of the Bible because when they read it, they just knew, and it was the Spirit telling them. And I'm like, I can't do this. I don't even know how to have this conversation. And
Right.
I like told the guy, goes, "I'm just gonna end the conversation now because you might as well have just told me I consulted the stars and they tell me which books are part of the Bible. I don't even know how to begin having this discussion."
Right. A lot of those guys are pretty crazy. Like there is, so like if you did a deep study, and just to talk about Sola Scriptura for a minute, because it does bother me, because it's not quite understood by people who, even the people who agree with it. I was arguing with somebody, and I said, "Look, you guys can't get Catholics to agree on the Catechism, and you don't think that we can't get people to read our Bibles? We can barely get our pastors to read the Bible." Like and we're the sola scriptura guys. So, excuse me. Basically, there is a logic that you can follow. All the books are self-referential to each other within the Bible. There is a logical flow. You could with study, right? not just reading the Bible, but like reading the Bible with purpose, successfully say, yes, everything we need is here. There's nothing missing that is not like if you took out like Nahum, there are things in Nahum that are referenced to either forward or backward based on the prophecies. In the case of the minor prophet, or other things, it's about God's love. Or it's about a reference to Jesus being born of a virgin, right? You can't just take those out and have the Bible function. Because if Jesus is suddenly born of a virgin and there's no verses to talk about it, it doesn't make any sense. Uh, but how do I want to put it? Like, you can't go into the Bible blind and expect to understand it. It was written by Jews in a Roman world in a different language than Hebrew, right? It was written mostly in Aramaic and Latin. And it was run by a guy who was a fisherman and a Pharisee of the Pharisees. You know, there's so many cultural differences for the New Testament. Sorry, I just mean the New Testament. I mean the church in the New Testament was run by a fisherman and a guy who was who was a Pharisee before he converted. There is so many different things that could be misunderstood. Like recently, I was reading a verse in Acts, and it said, Paul is called to Caesar. He shall be sent to Caesar, and then they reference Augustus a couple times. Well, anyone who knows Roman history knows that Augustus had been dead and buried for like 10 to 20 years by the time Jesus was alive, much less dead and resurrected. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that Augustus lived until about AD 40? No. It was all Roman emperors take the name of their famous predecessors, including Augustus. So calling him Augustus was a perfectly reasonable thing for a Roman citizen to do. And this is Festus talking to, Festus
Yep.
talking to King Agrippa. And the fact that they're under an empire and there's King Agrippa, what does that mean? There's a whole lot of cultural stuff. And I'm just talking culture. There's a whole lot of cultural stuff that people don't get that has to be studied to make Sola Scriptura understandable in a way. At least beyond, the basic scholarship. Like if you go in and you go, well, yes, this speaks to me, it just feels right. Feeling is, what's that one thing, feelings will get your wife beat to death with a golf trophy. Professionals have standards. It's, as a man who has many feelings in him, it's not something you can trust. This thing with Sola Scriptura has scholarship to it. It has genuine, serious scholarship to it. People study it, people justify it, people have debates over it. You can't just run in and say, well, I believe Sola Scriptura. Why? Well, and then you quote some stuff. Well, no, you have to look into it. What did the church fathers say? All the church fathers agreed that the 66 books we have in are there. And then they also had books that we do not have in the normal 66. What's the one with the fish?
Tobit.
Tobit. Like the Book of Tobit. The Book of Tobit is weird. It doesn't have many things that are referenced in other parts of the Bible. And in general, nobody notices in the Protestant circles that the Book of Tobit is gone. There's no dangling loose ends that I know of. There's no references to the Book of Tobit that aren't also references to like Psalms or something. And Tobit is after Psalms, if I recall the chronology right. I might be wrong. I'm not very studied on Apocrypha chronology. So you get these things, you look at them. If you don't understand the context for why, it doesn't make sense. Like in the Book of Maccabees, there are several things that are a little bit problematic in a way. Now, I'm choosing the best of the apocryphal books to pick on. One is the thing with the Spartans. It's weird and self-aggrandizing, and there's a lot, and it's just sort of a sign of a lot of things that make it more of a book about propaganda than an actual book of history. Two, there are implications that God just stopped doing things for a time. Now, he was still there, he was still active in the ways that he's active, but during that time there, he just didn't send any prophets. There are only the Maccabees, and even then, they just got this weird, eventually failed rebellion because they got subsumed back into the empires. Eventually, you have the thing is about prayers for the dead, which isn't how do I want to put it, which isn't backed up in as clear a way in other parts of Scripture. There's a whole lot of things that you have that you can say, hey, this is very unique to the Book of Maccabees. The style is different. There's a certain propagandic feel to it that doesn't come out very well, and there's some historical inaccuracies for some of this stuff, or exaggerations. And those things on their own would not be enough to throw a lot of shade onto it, right? Like, nobody's kicking in the Book of Maccabees door and saying, how dare you make a propaganda document. The amount of arguments that people have over the Book of Genesis are enough. I don't want to argue over a book of Apocrypha. But taken as its whole, you can say, hey, there might be something different here that's not included in the other books of Scripture. The other books of the Apocrypha have a lot of the angel stuff people talk about. Like to talk about, like Raphael and stuff like that. The only two angels, well, three angels that are mentioned, as I recall, and ignoring titles, there's some angels who have titles, is Gabriel, Michael, and Lucifer. One of these things is not like the others, and they have their own roles. They have clearly defined heavenly jobs, and even though it's implied rather than explicit, and they have somebody they're tied to. Gabriel is tied to the Holy Spirit, again, more by implication than explicit nature, as I understand it. Michael is tied to the God the Father, because he is often on God the Father's business when Jesus is not involved, or and then Lucifer is often tied with Jesus, and a sort of yin-yang opposite stuff that I haven't decided whether or not is Gnosticism, and deserves deeper research on my part to see whether I should believe it or not. But you see that there are clear things going on here. But then you have Raphael. They show up, they help, and it feels like it's sort of a fan fiction of Jacob's thing with when he wrestled Jesus, and Jesus tore out his hip, basically. And it's like, okay, you're taking this, they're helping, they have, these things that they say, but it doesn't connect up with other scripture the same way that people view the book of Ruth or the book of Esther, Proverbs, etc. Like the book of Wisdom, I know people like that, especially in Catholic circles. I don't really have anything against it. I don't know enough about it to say whether it's got things that are unique to it or not. But you can look at the book of Proverbs and say, would the Bible be less rich for it? Yes. Are there things that are referenced by other books of the Bible? Yes. The parables of Jesus Christ often have connections to the book of Proverbs. Things about how wise men are and how the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and so on and so forth. You can say, hey, look, these are the parallels. Old Testament, New Testament, they're still saying the fear of the Lord is above everything else. And then you have the book of Psalms, how the book of Psalms interacts with the rest of the Bible. Like when it comes to sola scriptura, there is a whole lot of things that go into it that are is more than just saying, well, I don't like the apocrypha books. Well, why aren't they? What makes them less than desirable for the thing that you desire? What are you missing from those books that you can say, hey, this needs to be in there. Hey, this doesn't need to be in there. And oftentimes, and to be fair across both aisles, neither side really understands the other's point on sola scriptura. They just kind of get it down to the meme level and go, well, hey, it's what we got. And sure, fine. Most of China was evangelized on sola scriptura, 66 books of the Bible, translated to Chinese anyway. All these other places have got the same treatment. It doesn't seem like their souls are in any peril more than ours. But you get what I'm saying. Like it's more than just going over something. And go, wow, this is the only way to do it. Like you can't. Anyway, it's just sort of like a whole bunch of things I consider to be very uneducated about.
See, yeah, that's the thing. Like, a lot of the stuff that I would go, like, that's a really terrible heresy is some of what I was joking about at the beginning of, like, inter-Catholic issues, which, you wouldn't, care about, but you just went on a tangent on Sola Scriptura, so now it's my turn.
That's fine.
You've locked me in. Uh, okay, so here's a discussion though that I think will genuinely mean something to you, and I'm going to, or at least in some limited way. I made this joke once, so I follow an apologist called Michael Lofton, and I like Lofton because he's an expert on Orthodox Catholic apologetics. Which I think is very useful because I do think that if you accept a lot of the presuppositions that make you Catholic as opposed to Protestant, then Orthodoxy is the one that you need to watch out for as like the other alternative. Like there are certain things that if you're Catholic if you've already decided I reject sola scriptura, right?
Right.
And I believe that an apostolic succession is important, then you need to decide why you're not, like, you need to say, okay, that's fine. There are churches that have that as an option. So why are you this one and not that one? Right? Like, you got to answer
Right.
that question. In the
Yep.
same way that the Protestant needs to, figure out what denomination they're in, honestly.
Yep.
Like, it's really not so much different from that. So that's why I appreciate Lofton, but he made a joke one day, and I do agree with this. Now, I will speak very negatively about the Pope, but in a very cagey way. But one thing that I don't like, I made this comment about Vox. He will sometimes come out and say, like, the fake Pope Francis, and I said, I don't really care what Vox says about the Pope. He's not a Catholic. He has no obligation to say anything polite or otherwise about the Pope. He could call him the Antichrist. He could call him whatever. But what I
Thank you.
dislike is, what was that?
Nothing. When you said he can call him the Antichrist, oh, thank you, permission.
Yeah, well, yeah, my whole point, like, in all seriousness, is you don't need my permission, right?
Right.
Like, my permission is not required. But what I don't like is somebody like Vox going the fake Pope, because I'm like, see, you have like no idea the controversies and intricacies and things like that go into deciding what is or isn't a Pope. So Michael Lofton he made a short video, like a 30-second video, uh, where he said, like, he goes, Rad Trad Bob goes, hey, you gotta recognize and resist. The Pope is terrible. He's just the worst. Like, he's tearing
Right.
down everything we stand for. You got to reject Vatican II. Oh, hey, Protestant Pete, you really need to come under the union of the Pope, or you're going to hell. Uh,
Right.
and he's absolutely right. That is the attitude that I have kind of moved away from, right? Like, because I was
Right.
getting more into the radical movement, but I started to see that there were issues in, the ecclesiology, I guess is how I would put it, or in the logic I was using to defend it, and the intelligent Protestants, including you, would occasionally pick up on that and go like, why aren't you just Protestant? Yeah. Uh, and there were and you see this with like really radical traditionalist Catholics, like Taylor Marshall is big in that score. You've never heard of him. I have. He's a really radical traditionalist Catholic. He'll go on and on about the Pope. And there was an Orthodox ecologist named Jay Dyer who came out and said, I agree with everything you're saying. Why are you Catholic? He's like, you're
Right.
completely right. Like, everything you've said about the Pope, he's like, I agree with you. He's like, so what are you doing? And I agree with him. Like, if what they're saying is true, then why are you Catholic?
Yep.
Like, so if you want to get into like the nuances of my position, I tend to hold with a like a Michael Lofton esque position, uh, where he would say that though the magisterium can err, they can't speak absolute heresy, like, which is a specific type of like an extremely serious error in the sense that is defined by the modern church. And thus, if you were to assent to what the magisterium said, your soul would not be moved off of the path of salvation. And I appreciate that position because it gives you kind of an idea of like what's even the point of the magisterium. Now, historically, it must be admitted that this is something that you would need to get into a lot of very specific situations for, like, does this hold up under scrutiny, right?
Right.
Specifically, people will point to Honorius, who was condemned as a heretic at a council. However, at that same council, they read the letter from Saint Agatho, or from not Saint Pope Agatho, where he claimed the indefectibility of the Roman See. At the same council, Honorius was condemned, which is worth looking. It's an odd historical point that's worth looking into. There's the three chapters controversy when you get into, like, now I'm just naming historical things. I'm not going to go into it, but what's called the three chapters controversy with Pope Vigilius. Uh, and there's various things people will talk about. The quote unquote reversal on the death penalty. I have read the official church document in which Pope Francis made his comments on the death penalty. Uh, it's called and this is gonna sound very dumb because it sounds like a dumb document. This is a real Latin name, Fratelli Tutti. Uh,
Tutti
and I've
frutti,
read it, and
fresh
I
and
don't
fruity.
think what was that?
No.
Something tutti fruity, I'm sure. Uh,
You know me
Uh,
too well.
but I've read the document, and I don't think there's a contradiction in there, you know. And there's all sorts of things of like what counts as a word from the magisterium versus what counts as a word from the Pope, and that Francis is certainly stretching the limits of like, okay, what can a Pope say and how much can he say and whatever. The point is, I'm not trying to defend whether even or not I'm not trying to defend what he's doing so much as I'm saying if you believe that the Pope can err in such a serious way that souls are led off of the path of salvation, then why are you Catholic and not Orthodox, at least? And then once you're in Orthodox, if you want to investigate the various flavors of Protestantism from there, I suppose that's your prerogative. But I'm just saying that you need to come up with a workable theory for like why the chair of Peter is a thing. And if you're going to be Catholic, that is the thing that separates Catholics from Orthodox. Now, the thing that separates Catholics and Orthodox from Protestants is apostolic succession. Uh, Obviously, there's doctrinal issues, but I would say that like the thing that keeps those doctrinal issues apart is that we believe in like the importance of apostolic succession specifically. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, but the difference between Orthodox and Catholics is the Pope. Like, if you don't have a theory for like why the Pope is important and why you need him and a way to justify this, then you should be questioning why you're Catholic. It goes into something that Pope Benedict once said that people criticized him for, but that I agree with, where he basically said, like, you don't really know. I'm trying to think of how to put it. Like, you shouldn't be a Christian if you're only a Christian because you're told to be a Christian, right? Like,
Right.
and it's the same basic idea. Like, if you grow up in the Catholic Church and you like, it's one thing if you haven't really, you're getting what I've heard people refer to the term fed. Like, you're getting fed in the church. There's no real reason for you to look. But once people start to offer alternatives to you, like, you need to figure out how you're justifying the fact that you're Catholic as
Yep.
opposed to something else. Like, and if you can't, then you should seriously consider what you're doing here. Yeah. like
Yep.
like
Like,
what is the point?
if the question is, why are you Christian? Well, my daddy was. Your soul might be in peril. Like, unironically.
Right. Now, with Catholicism, I understand that there's a little bit of a different point. Like, if you're in a country that's Catholic, where everybody around you is Catholic, and there isn't a serious alternative. Problem is, we're not in that world anymore, right? Like,
Yep.
there are maybe like 2 countries on Earth that are like this, and one of them's Liechtenstein. Uh, and I think Liechtenstein legalized abortion, so maybe it's not great for your soul. Uh, which is terrible, but
Yep.
anyway, you get the point. Like, you should know, you should have an idea of like the reason for your faith.
Yep.
Now, I have my issues with orthodoxy. With that said, I do respect the Orthodox as a whole, right? Like, I don't think that. Let me put it another way. I mean, I hold to a view of like the extra ecclesiam nulla salus. I hold to a fairly broad view of extra ecclesiam nulla salus, right? Which is, I think, the modern Catholic perspective. How much of it is not the modern Catholic perspective, once again, ends up being like really debatable. Yeah. Like, how much of. I'm trying to think of how to put it.
I don't understand most of that phrase, I'm afraid.
I'm gonna rewind. Yeah. I'm trying to think of how to put it. So extra ecclesiam nulla salus is the doctrine no salvation outside of the church, and specifically the Catholic Church. And then
Alright.
it's been clarified in statements like
The one
unum
that
sanct.
makes me angry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. Yes. Uh, exactly. And it's clarifying statements like unum sanctum to specifically mean like the church in union with the pope and stuff like that. I take a fairly broad view of what that means, and I think that the modern Catholic Church, generally speaking, does. Now, a
Right.
broad view does not mean a universal view, nor does it mean that I don't think that being Catholic is important. But what it means is I hold open the possibility of people being a part of the church who are not visibly a part of it. Uh, that's not to say I think they're in the best position, nor that that's the position that they should be in. But I don't hold out. I don't say, yeah, no, that person's not going to hell because they're not Catholic,
Right.
right? Like, that would be wrong. And I think that that's the position of the church today. What I was saying is there is some debate over whether the church would have understood this throughout history. With that said, I do think that there is indication from Jesus that this is the case. Like, I'm trying to remember the verse, but there's talk of people who don't even know that they're Christian, but who are Christian. Do you remember the verse? Because I can't think of it off the top of my head. Jesus says something like this in the Gospels. Like, he goes, like, they don't know that they're, or it might be in the Gospels or maybe in Revelation or something. Like, they don't know that they're doing the will of the Father, but they are, or something like that.
Oh, from what I understand, it's not taken as salvation. I can't. You'd
No,
have to show me it.
I'm not basing the entire theology on it. I'm just saying, like, there is some indication that supports the broader theology of, even if you don't know it or don't think you're doing it, you might be doing the will of God. But anyway,
Right.
that's not the point. I take a fairly broad view of what extra ecclesiam non salus means, which isn't to say that I don't think conversion is important, both on the level of Protestant to Catholic and on the broader level of non-Christian to Christian. Just that I don't make assumptions about people, based on their external presence in a church,
Right.
which I think is as fair as you could possibly be, right?
Yes.
Uh,
I mean,
but
it's even like even I'll say, that you do like any Christian is part of the Church of God, like the universal quote unquote Catholic Church. But the thing is that I don't mean the Catholic Church of Rome. I mean a literal universal truth church of all believers who have ever existed. Like it's one of those things where there's clear scriptural evidence for what the Catholics are saying in a broad way, but it is put down to the Catholics rather than a more universal sort of everyone who believes in Jesus Christ is a part of this.
sure, and yeah, like we're not on the on the debate stream. I'm just trying to give you an idea of why why I'm very uncomfortable with the attitude of like of radical traditionalists who are highly exclusionary. Uh, it just makes me uncomfortable is the best way I could put it. Like it makes me think you don't really have a way to justify your Catholicism. And then eventually you get into absolutely insane extreme views like Peter Diamond and his brother who started a fake monastery and claim that them and their 1,000 YouTube followers are the true church and everybody else is a heretic.
What? That's pretty wild.
That's real. And he debated somebody on Pints with Aquinas and won. But like the reason he won, this is actually important. So he debated somebody who was a part of I would consider them, though this is controversial, a schismatic group called the SSPX, the Society of St. Pius X. They were founded by somebody who was excommunicated by Rome, and they've never fully reconciled with Rome since, though they've made like partial, moves back and forth. And the reason that he won is because he correctly pointed out your ecclesiology is inconsistent. I take it to its logical conclusion. You don't.
Yep.
Like, and that's kind of my point, right? Like, this is a guy who, by the way that he's acting, like, how is he justifying that you need to listen to the Pope when he doesn't listen to the Pope?
Right.
Like, he's part of a schismatic group, essentially. And the actual schismatic is like, at least I have the courage of my convictions, and he's kind of correct.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong, like, I think that this guy is, I don't know if insane is the right word, but I think that he is completely out to lunch. Like, I don't think that there is anything even if I were to believe a lot of what the traditionalists believe, then my first move at the very least would be to the Orthodox Church. It would not be to a crazy 1,000-person schismatic group, just on the sheer basis of like what is more likely to be true, that the Orthodox Church is the continuation of Christ Church, or this guy with 1,000 YouTube followers is the only one who got it right.
We don't even
Like,
have 1,000 YouTube followers, Anthony. Who are you to
no, we
criticize
don't.
him? Who are you to
We
criticize?
don't.
Right,
We should start a church. What?
yeah. Church of the Holy Gunpowder. If ever there's a
Yeah.
monster, we know what prayers to say. How to pack our gunpowder to kill Bigfoot.
I don't know. You get the frustration from my end though. It's like
Yes.
from what I could see, what you're doing by planting all of this doubt in the magisterium of the church and Vatican II and all of this is you are essentially explaining to me why the Catholic Church is not the true church. Where I have to wonder, like, do you really think this is helping?
Right.
Like, are
It,
you converting people by telling everyone, yeah, our last council was totally heretical? And
It
I've
was
been on
Vatican
that
II,
track.
though.
Yeah, and I've been on that track before, but like I kind of pulled myself out and going like I'm not sure how I could justify that to myself.
Right.
But anyway, now it's up to you since we both went into interdenominational issues.
Yeah, we were always going to end up there. I didn't mind. Like,
It's okay.
and I'll piggyback off that. A lot of people like misunderstand what like Protestantism is these days, and it comes from like all sides. Like I call myself a Protestant not because I am in protestation of the Roman Catholic Church, but because that is the basic educational name for what how I take my tea religiously. Uh, in reality, I look forward to the day that evangelical is the real term because, as I tell a lot of Catholics who never seem to believe me, we barely talk about Catholics. You know, it is, we are not here to refute Vatican II, or to complain to the Holy Roman Emperor that the papal legate was mean to us again, or even throw people through windows, as delightful as that would be in our current day and age. No, like we show up, we go to church. I was sick, so I didn't go to church today, but I listened to the message online, and it was a guy from another Protestant slash evangelical church, a college in this case, and he um, gave a very good message about not being a slave to sin, uh, and to have a sort of get up and go attitude to serving God. But mostly it was about not being a slave to sin. Uh, so it's like there was no mention of the Catholic Church that I recall. If there was, it was a side comment and not anything to do with the main thrust of it. And
So
mm,
I'm gonna cut you off to just point out the only time I ever heard a Protestants mentioned was when I was at a traditional Latin mass, and in the homily, the priest just referred to in passing Luther as the arch heretic. It
beautiful,
amused me. It amused me. Keep going.
right? But like at this point, like both Catholics and Protestants have the thing fully mapped out. Like they have their own thing going, and it's not like the religious wars of the 1600s anymore, or even the witch hunters or the Jesuits, or anything. That's right. I'm calling for the dissolution of the Jesuits. It's the only brave takes on this show. Uh, the it doesn't come up like it doesn't exist. And in not a single Catholic service I've been to has a Catholic mentioned anything to do with Protestants, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Uh, it's one of those things where like there's a lot of animosity online where it just doesn't exist. Like Orthodox guys going, if you look at Joel Osteen, Orthodoxy was the only way to go, and it's like my brother in Christ, perhaps. You're not Slavic. It is almost never the appropriate time to go Orthodox. It is a national church of the Slavs, and other things like that. But they'll go, no, it's based, for this reason or that reason.
See, yeah, I've outlined some of my larger issues with the Orthodox Church before, and I clarify as I say this that like I think the Orthodox Church, capital O, is itself like I do think that I don't know how to put it except to say like it is a mere Christian church, I guess is how I would say it. Uh Both to describe to the Protestants, and I do think it's an apostolic church as well. However, I will note that there are people who will be like, I can't stay with Francis. He changed the teaching on the death penalty, not knowing that the Greek Orthodox Church of America has been anti-death penalty for decades.
Right.
Like, you, you do know that, like, they're not nearly as based as you think they are
Right.
in many. Like, they're affected by the rot just like everyone else.
Yep. Yep. And it goes through things where, like, I see people who are like teeny boppers running around thinking they're so cool because they're Orthodox, and they actually got involved in a church for once in their life, and they actually had a community around them that didn't look at them like a pariah or a blood bag or something like that, like a lot of the old boomer churches are. You know, like, and it's like, oh wow, this is so great. I'm like, brother, you've just hit base normal. Like, this is how things should be for everybody. And then that doesn't even go into the theology of the Orthodox Church, which is wacky because they've spent a very long time thinking about things. So they use very specific terms that honestly does make a little sense until you get into it. And it turns out that they'll write entire volumes on, single words to no
So much
benefit.
of the yeah, like, so much of the Orthodox Church, and I'm going to generalize very unfairly. So if you're an Orthodox who's listening, I honestly kind of apologize because I am aware that what I'm about to say is a major oversimplification. But so much of the Orthodox Church's identity is rooted in not being Catholic, and
Yep.
I mean that. Like, I can justify that very seriously.
Oh, I
For
could justify
example,
it too. Like, it's
if you convert to Orthodoxy, you need to do two things from Catholicism specifically. If you convert from Protestantism, I don't think they make you do this, but you need to swear that you disavow the filioque in the creed, the and the Son clause in the creed, and you need to disavow Vatican I statements on the Pope. Like, they make you do that if you're gonna become Orthodox. Like, that is how central it is to what they do, and
which I
they
want to be
have
clear here. No average Protestant understands what the filioque is if they've even heard of
almost nobody in the entire world truly understands the filioque controversy.
it.
Is so convoluted.
So
Like,
it's a bit of
is
punctuation,
on
right? No.
and yeah, so much of what the Orthodox Church does, like, it's really interesting. I saw a debate, like, this is something that won't apply to you at all, but it was a debate on purgatory, between an Orthodox and a Catholic, right? And
Yeah.
by the end of the debate, the Orthodox said, we don't believe in a purgatory with fire. Now, we do believe that there is an in between place where people who have temporal punishment need to be purified of their sins, but, like, not with fire. And the Catholic was like, my brother in Christ, you just described purgatory. Like, and he's like, no, no, we are not Catholic. And then
Right.
it's like, but you are. Like, and that's kind of how the Catholic ends. Like, I just want the Orthodox to start, like, admitting what they believe. Like,
There-
he's going, no, because you believe in a literal fire, and he's like, no, we don't. Like, we don't believe it's literal. Who told you that? It was pretty amusing. It was an interesting debate as far as those things go, but the ending was was really interesting because he was just like your statement. He's like, I'm gonna level with you. Like, your closing statement, I agree with all of it. So I don't know what we're talking about here.
there's
But I see that all the time with the Orthodox, like the Marian doctrines as well. It's like, no, we don't believe in the Immaculate Conception. We just believe that Mary was sinless her entire life and was, full of grace from the moment of her conception. And then you just go like, yeah. And then they go, but it's not the Immaculate Conception because our view of original sin is slightly different in a really, really technical way. And
right.
then you just go, okay, sure, fine.
I don't even want to get into that just because when I do, my brain
No,
starts
no, I'm not
twisting.
bringing it up to get into the debate on the Marian doctrines. I'm just pointing
No,
out
no,
that,
I
like, the
meant
Orthodox.
Orthodox original sin more. Just because it's one of
Yeah,
those things where it's like terms on terms, very
right,
academic to no
exactly,
use.
exactly. Like, there's so much, and it just comes across now to me. And again, this is not really fair, I understand, but it comes across to me as it seems to me like you're just hyper defining it in this way to not be Catholic.
Right.
Like, maybe I'm being unfair, but that's what it looks like.
Right. And I don't think you're being unfair for some of it. Like there was a thing where they had an ecumenical council of like, American preachers and Catholic priests and Orthodox whatever, and like everyone sat down. They're like, okay, guys, we're gonna do this. We're gonna work out some things. I can't remember what it was over. It wasn't an actual ecumenical council. It just had like all the denominations present, and
Right.
like at the last moment possible, all the Orthodox guys stood up and left, and it turns out that somebody had said something decades ago, uh, which was insulting to the Orthodoxy, and they, you know, basically said we're not participating because this guy's there and he hasn't apologized to us, and scuppered the whole thing. Nothing was got done. People's like weeks were wasted on this just because they decided to be particular about it. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and place to be particular. There are people online who I will not debate with because I know that they will only debate me in bad faith. Not that I debate that much. But it's like, oh, do you want to talk about this? No, because I know that you are a person who respects not the rules of warfare when it comes to the friend and enemy distinction. And brother, all Christians are friends until proven otherwise. It's like you can't debate with an Orthodox for the simple reason is that it'll come down to them just saying no to be obstinate, and you can't break through that in any sort of meaningful way.
Right. And again, that's obviously a generalization. Like, I'm sure that there's like a very polite Orthodox young
Sure,
man out there who is
but it's
who is like, oh,
certainly,
I'll talk to you, and
but
I'm
it's,
sure you will.
but it's certainly not among the Orthobros types, who are basically just new Christians, still on that new Christian high,
Yep.
and they really do need to come down on it so the work can be done. It's nice to see. It's absolutely lovely, but um, you know,
Somebody posted a thing and like they're correct. They said, or he goes, Orthodox, I need you to understand, like I need you to grasp that us Catholics, he goes, we legitimately do not, he goes, you are not a threat to us. We do not think about you at all,
right?
except for the fact that a very small subset of online Orthodox are very annoying.
Yes.
It's like I goes, I need you to understand this from the bottom of my heart. We don't care about you.
Yeah, yeah, and that comes
And
comes down to a lot of stuff, like especially in the theological debates. Like the people who do know, the people who do care, the people who do have minds for it, care a lot. But the average person knows nothing. They don't know the filioque. They don't really understand what Vatican II put forward. They don't really get why Benny Hinn's bad. They don't get why Joel Osteen's bad, for that matter, because they're slightly different from each other, but they're similar, the same thing. Maybe they know enough to know that paying Benny Hinn $1,000 a month as holy mustard seed money, or whatever he's calling it, is a bad thing to do because he's corrupt. Do they know the details? No. Do they understand why all of Ravi Zacharias' stuff just went up in smoke because it was revealed uh, that he was sleeping with his masseuse? No. Do they understand the whole Pope Francis issue with the pedophiles? No. Like the average person cannot tell you the true minutia that matters, that truly does matter. Because I'm going to be real, and I don't mean this to start a fight or anything like that, but the idea of the Immaculate Conception raises some issues with original sin, and God's allowance of it to propagate throughout the earth. If free will can be maintained, but also the sinful consequences, the sin of it, be removed, then there were some things that just didn't need to happen. Then it happens and it feels bad. It feels real bad to think about it like that. And I'm sure for a lot of Catholics, things like sola scriptura are very, very hurtful. Like, why in the world would you take books out of your Bible? There are things there that have like this really deep, meaningful stuff to it, and it matters. But the thing is that it only matters when it becomes a question of faith. When things like the Immaculate Conception becomes a question of faith. When things like papal authority become a matter of faith. Like and I mean that like Catholics believing in papal authority, not Protestants believing in papal authority. Like we're in a different era than the theologians of 100 years ago, whose ideas we're still kind of debating today, even though things have changed immensely between them and the people of 100 years ago, but not really from us to them. I've commented to people that I view this age as an age of nihilism. I agree with Nietzsche that we're in the middle of 2 centuries of nihilism, and what can you do about it? Like, we're just kind of stuck in it. And I can't like reach across the screen and slap somebody and say you shouldn't choose your church based on how you perceive how based it is, and you shouldn't choose your church based on the fact that the Pope has the fanciest hat, and you shouldn't base your church because it's the most contrarian. In the case of some Protestants, like there's a lot of choices that go on here that are just not based on the Holy Spirit and the guidance of a rightly ordered mind in life. If you're choosing your Christian choices based on contrarianism, you're not really choosing it based on any spiritual need that is available. Like, it doesn't work that way. You have to have at least preliminary reasons as to why you chose this church as opposed to others. If it's not as plain as, I moved in next door, turns out there's a church, and I just felt led to go, and turns out, the guy preaches from the Word. It's pretty great. This is the basilica that is a mile away, and I can drive to it, so I always feel extra blessed because it's a basilica, or the Greek Orthodox, whatever they do. But it's there are things that are clear signs of a rightly ordered mind. I go to my church because my pastor preaches the gospel. That's it. I don't care about the people as much as you might think. I love them all to death, but it's not about the building. The building's pretty good. It's not about the music. The music's pretty good. It is only about the fact that I feel led to be there because the pastor preaches the gospel. If you are going there because an internet meme told you to, you are not doing it for a holy reason unless it is justified post hoc. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Yep.
And that's
sorry, my mic was not close to me. Yep, it makes sense.
And that's kind of what people don't get about the whole thing. Like, whatever your debate is, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, whatever, the choices you make have to be based on not what's based, not having as many sacraments as the other guy. And it's like, the gag where, like, the kid has 2 hot dogs. It's like, gee, Jimmy, why do you have 2 sacraments? I don't know, Timmy. Maybe God loves me more. But, it doesn't work like that. This stuff ultimately is not dependent on half of what Christians argue over. It is dependent only on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Can I hear an amen, Brother Anthony?
Sure.
Yeah.
Amen.
There we go. There we go. We're feeling it. We're feeling it. Oh, pass the money plate around, brother Anthony. I feel it today.
We gotta do another Joel Osteen game stream because that was actually one of some of the most fun that I've had in the stream.
It took so long though.
It did,
It was
but
such a weird
it
game.
it was funny though.
Joel Osteen. It's like all of a sudden a gremlin comes out, takes $10 out of your pocket, and jumps back in the box. It's like
My
what?
aunt, God bless her soul, was a Joel Osteen fan. Had several of his books. Disappointed me greatly.
Oh no,
Uh,
she wasn't
she was
Catholic.
no, she was very much a Christian. It was very important to her and all of that. But
Yeah,
she did have some like prosperity gospel tendencies, and she had a trying to think of how to put it. She mm, so she had a book about Trump prophecies that were pointing out to Trump's like Trump's presidency was like the fulfillment of, Revelation or something.
like as if he's the Antichrist. Because I'm pretty
No,
sure
the
that was
opposite.
Jared Kushner.
No, the
Huh.
opposite. Like that he was he was like a servant of God and he was a messiah figure almost like in the older technical sense of like an anointed one, right?
Yes.
Like don't get me wrong, she didn't think that Donald Trump was Jesus and she would never have said that. But
Right.
she did think that like she had one of those books that was like no, Donald Trump's gonna bring in, he's gonna bring in the new wave of Christianity. Hallelujah, amen. Uh no,
Brother Anthony, that sounded sarcastic.
she was actually quite conservative, but she did have those prosperity gospel tendencies.
Yeah.
However, she was very much, I would say, a legitimate Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very important to her. She worshipped God. She worshipped Jesus. So there's a lot of hope for her in the hereafter.
Yeah.
But it's it was very like she had multiple Joel Osteen books, and like I vaguely remember the one time I ever brought it up to her that I did not like Joel Osteen. She was like annoyed about it. It's like, no, it's great. And I'm like, if you say so. It's like, no, it's not. Uh,
Right.
we're at 8:48, and I've exhausted my topics. Do you have anything you want to add, Ben?
No. No,
Drink
not
more
really.
Ovaltine.
Always drinking more Ovaltine. I'm drinking some Canadian Dry. Actually, right now. Uh, no,
For next week, I should probably watch one of the anime that are coming out because there are like tons of good ones.
please. I mean, even I want to talk about anime now. I'm following some anime. Apparently, Mob
There are so
Psycho.
many good anime coming out, and I just haven't had time to watch any of them.
Right.
Like that's the thing. People sometimes hear it's like, "Oh, I'm not watching anime right now." It's like, "Oh, so you finally decided that anime's degenerate?" It's like, "No, I just don't have time."
Right.
It's like I would watch it. And there's good ones: Mob Psycho season 3, Chainsaw Man, Spy Family. I haven't even
Chainsaw Man
finished
is
season
pretty
1.
good.
What's up?
Chainsaw Man is pretty good.
So I've heard. You know what I would like to discuss if you get the time to do it? Fujimoto's one shots. Goodbye, Eri. Look back and just listen to the song.
Sure.
I think that that's a good topic for discussion because especially Goodbye, Eri and Look Back are quite long, and I think that there's actually like a lot to analyze there. Uh,
I think that.
Fujimoto, go ahead.
So, Goodbye Eri was about the girl dying. And I think Look Back, was that about the mom being abusive, maybe?
No, Look Back was relatively new. It just came out on the Shonen Jump app. And it was about a girl drew comics for her local, her school paper,
Oh
and
yeah.
she realizes that there's another girl who's a shut-in at home who is a better artist than she is. So she gives up on it until she learns that that girl is actually a huge fan of hers.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like Look Back a lot. I found it very sad, but quite moving overall. Fujimoto's good at that.
That and Fire Punchers is pretty good in general. I just like his work. Why is it so good? I
There's
don't
a
know.
lot, like, what I like about Fujimoto too is that there's a lot to analyze if you decide to, but much like don't listen to just listen to the song is saying, like you could just read it and enjoy it on a surface level, but I do think that there's more there. Like he's worth talking about. You know.
Yeah. Well, in that case, I'll try to get my hands on Look Back and a couple of other things. Reread Goodbye Ari and just listen to the song. Just because
I
it
thought
is
just
worth
listening to
reading.
the song was hilarious and it might be my favorite one shot. That's not to say it's the best. It's not the best one, but it's my favorite one because it came out the day before Chainsaw Man Part 2 came out,
Yep.
which is so I am convinced that it was about like people interpreting Chainsaw Man,
Right.
which makes it much funnier.
I mean, it's yeah, it's worth it. It is worth it. We should always be watching, reading, and so on. Good stuff, good art, because it does benefit the soul. We're not meant to be
Yeah, look,
godless heathens.
I've been very open about the fact that like I'm not really convinced by like the anti-anime propaganda campaign that the degeneracy that is there is often like in specific subgenres and shows that you can avoid and I would recommend you do avoid.
Yeah,
Like I don't defend when anime gets overly degenerate, but at the same token, there is a point where like sometimes they're showing degeneracy, but not in a way that's supposed to make it look good. For example, Kill la Kill, I do think is worth watching. Now, like anything else, I think that if something is going to tempt you to sin, for example, scantily clad women in Gurren Lagann or Kill la Kill, then you shouldn't watch it. But if you are of a mature enough mind and are not of that sort of, not at that much risk of temptation, then there absolutely have many, many things that are worth that can enrich the soul and benefit your life. Kill a Kill in some ways, like it's degenerate in some ways, but the degeneracy is there for a reason. There's a point. You know, uh, like the relationship between Ragyo and Sasuke. My sister years ago did a whole article on this of all things, on Ragyo's on the molestation scene that was very controversial, and she did an article where defending it as actually one of the most brilliant scenes in the entire show. Uh, like I think her argument was that the way that it was framed and set up, that you were in the position of Sasuke, both vaguely turned on but also disgusted, and then you settle in with this deep hatred for Ragyo, and that the way that they set it up really sets up Sasuke's heel face turn later in the show. But stuff like that, like it's worth talking about, is what I'm saying, and it's worth watching if you are mature enough to understand what you're seeing. You know what I
yep,
mean? That's all I got for today.
yep,
Drink more Ovaltine.
yep. And I guess we will do an anime stream finally then.
It's been a while.
Next week. I know that there should be a new episode of My Hero Academia next week. Hunter x Hunter
Oh
came
yeah,
back.
that too. Even that I've heard has been pretty good this season, which is notable because season 5 was ass. Uh,
Yeah. All right. Goodbye, folks.